Welcome to the Debunkers podcast. Ever have that moment where you're absolutely 100% sure about something? Like, say, you lock the front door.
Oh, yeah.
Only to spend the next, 10 minutes utterly convinced you left it wide open. Maybe you invited some squirrels in.
Happens to the best of us. That little mental loop.
Yeah.
That's just a tiny, tiny taste of what we're diving into today. Belief perseverance. It's hilariously persistent.
Right. Sticking to our guns.
Exactly. And we've got some really interesting material here. A couple of academic papers looking into why we cling so tightly to our ideas, even when the evidence says, maybe rethink that.
Okay.
Then there's a piece from UConn today about how our brains, actively resist facts sometimes.
Actively resist.
And of course, our old friend confirmation bias gets a look in.
Confirmation bias always shows up to the party. So our mission today...
Should we choose to accept it?
Exactly. The irony is noted. Our mission is to figure out why our brains can be such stubborn toddlers about admitting we're wrong.
Right, like broccoli refusal, but for facts.
Perfect. And we'll try to do it without making you, our listener, feel too silly about, your undying belief that pineapple definitely belongs on pizza. Or doesn't.
No judgment here. Okay, let's unpack this cognitive comedy show.
Let's do it. Where do we start?
So the first paper we looked at really doesn't pull any punches. It says right off the bat that sticking to discredited beliefs is, and I quote, ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous. Everywhere.
Everywhere. And it even hints, maybe a little dramatically, at a certain feebleness of mind.
Ouch. A bit harsh, maybe.
A touch blunt, yeah. But it sets the scene. So takeaway number one. Our brains can grab onto some, frankly, bizarre ideas with very little proof.
Right.
It shows how powerful our existing beliefs really are.
Right. It's like the world keeps serving up facts that contradict what we think, and our brain just goes, nope, still think the earth is flattish, not interested, reality.
And this isn't new. The paper gives this great historical example from the 17th century. A Belgian guy, Van Helmont.
Van Helmont, okay.
Apparently he had a recipe for making mice. Seriously.
A recipe. Like add flour, water, and spontaneous rodents.
Almost. Just toss some grain and some old rags into a corner, wait a bit, and presto, mice.
Okay, that sounds utterly ridiculous now.
Of course. But the point is, someone, a respected someone, actually believed this. Then along comes this Italian doctor, Reddy.
Reddy, got it.
He did a simple experiment. Meat in jars, some covered, some open. Maggots only showed up in the open jars where flies could get in.
Okay. Common sense experiment. That just settled it, right?
Yeah.
Spontaneous generation debunked.
You'd think, but no, the believers weren't having it. They started coming up with these really elaborate excuses.
Oh, here we go. The mental gymnastics.
Exactly. My favorite. They argued that boiling the meat, which Reddy did in some versions, destroyed some kind of a active principle in the air.
An active principle needed for instant mouse creation, presumably.
Apparently. You almost have to admire the creativity involved in dodging the obvious. It really shows how we invent these complicated stories afterwards just to protect what we already believe.
It really does.
Yeah.
So we build stories to prop up our beliefs.
And building on that, the paper mentions a more modern study, Ross, 1975.
Okay.
They had people try to tell real suicide notes from fake ones. And they gave them feedback, totally made-up feedback. Some were told they were great at it, some average, some terrible.
Okay, classic psychology experiment setup. Where's the twist?
The twist is, after the task, they told everyone, hey, that feedback, completely fake, bogus, part of the experiment.
Right, so it shouldn't matter anymore.
But it did. The people who were initially told they were good at it, they still rated their ability higher than those told they were bad at it, even knowing the feedback was garbage.
Wow. So even explicitly telling someone the basis for their belief is false doesn't completely undo its effect.
Not completely. It still influenced how they saw themselves. Our brains seem to really hang on to that positive reinforcement, even fake positive reinforcement. It's sticky.
Sticky indeed. Okay, so we're pretty good at sticking to our beliefs, even bad ones. What about the reasons we give for this?
Right. So the paper then kind of dismisses what it calls folk psychological explanations.
Folk psychological, you mean like the simple everyday reasons?
Exactly. Stuff like, oh, they just misunderstood, or they're ignorant, or they're just embarrassed to be wrong, or even just plain lazy, stubborn, or, not very bright.
Which, let's be honest, is often our first thought when someone believes something truly bonkers. They're just being difficult.
It's the easy explanation. But the paper argues it's usually more complex than just being obstinate. There's a deeper mechanism.
Okay, what's the deeper thing happening?
They found that actually generating explanations for why you believe something, finding reasons, making causal links, actually makes the belief stronger.
Wait, explaining it makes it stick harder.
Yes. It fortifies it, makes it even harder to change later. It's like our brain acts like a little lawyer, constantly building a case for what we already think, even if the evidence it's using is, pretty weak.
So we decide something is true first, and then we figure out the why. That feels backwards.
It does seem backwards, and the paper acknowledges this raises big questions, like if the explanations come later, how did the belief even start?
Good point.
And why do these after-the-fact reasons feel so important and stick around so well? What's really going on in our cognitive machinery? This moves us beyond just stubbornness towards the actual brain processes.
Okay, I'm ready to retire they're just dense theory. Give me the fancy cognitive stuff. What's this pet theory concept? Sounds kind of cute.
Oh, it does sound cute. But here, pet theories are these interconnected sets of beliefs we build up. They help us make sense of the world, organize things.
Like a mental model.
Exactly. And what's amazing is we start building these ridiculously early. Babies, even, with no formal teaching, are constantly making little hypotheses about how stuff works.
Like when my nephew kept dropping his spoon. Testing gravity, the little scientist. Is it an early pet theory?
In a very basic way, yeah. Kids are always inventing causal links, maybe twisting the facts a bit to fit their naive understanding. It's cute when a kid thinks clouds are cotton candy.
Less cute when an adult insists vaccines cause magnetism.
Considerably less cute, yes. So those early bits of knowledge, those first, sometimes shaky inferences we make, they become the foundation for these more stubborn adult pet theories.
Ah, I see. So the flawed ideas we cook up early on can stick around.
Precisely. The paper directly links these naive misconceptions from childhood to belief perseverance later. When new info clashes with those deep-rooted early ideas, even if we intellectually know the new stuff is right,
The old stuff fights back.
it puts up a surprisingly strong fight. It's like a weed with really deep roots tangled up with everything else in your mental garden.
Okay, our brains have these filing cabinets labeled Stuff I Believe, and evicting a file is major cognitive demolition work. Now, the paper even gives us a partial taxonomy of our wrongness. I kind of love that phrase.
It's pretty fitting, isn't it? They break down the types of beliefs we get stubborn about.
Lay it on me. What kinds of wrong are we talking about?
Well, first, there are general theoretical ones, like the classic misconception that seasons happen because Earth gets closer or farther from the sun.
Right, which isn't the main reason. Tilt is.
Exactly. Then you have more specific practical beliefs, like maybe thinking certain dietary supplements are absolutely essential, regardless of evidence.
Okay, and the third type.
Social and personal beliefs. The big one here is the better than average effect. Most of us think we're above average drivers, or smarter, or funnier.
Which is statistically tricky.
Mathematically impossible for everyone, yes. So the sheer range of things we can be stubbornly, irrationally wrong about is quite impressive, really.
And it seems like it doesn't matter how these beliefs get challenged. New facts, pointing out bad logic, even taking away the original proof, our brains just kind of shrug.
Often, yeah. Which brings us to the cognitive culprits, the actual brain mechanisms that, sabotage our reasoning and keep us stuck.
Okay, the glitches in the system.
The paper talks about cognitive limitations, basic operating principles, and crucially, heuristics and biases. These are the mental shortcuts.
Ah, heuristics and biases. Handy shortcuts most of the time, but sometimes they lead us straight down the garden path to Wrongville.
Couldn't have said it better. And the absolute superstar of this particular show, confirmation bias.
Knew it. Tell us about it.
It's that massive tendency we all have to actively look for info that confirms what we already believe. And, just as importantly, to ignore, dismiss, or forget information that suggests we might be, gasp, wrong.
It's like deciding you hate a restaurant and then only reading the one-star reviews online, right? Filtering reality.
Perfect analogy. We all do it to some extent. What other gremlins are messing with our thinking?
Next on the list is the availability heuristic.
Okay, availability.
This is when we judge how likely something is based on how easily examples pop into our heads. So if something is vivid or recent in memory, we think it's more common.
Exactly. So maybe you know one person who had a bad reaction to a vaccine. That single, vivid story might stick in your mind and make you overestimate the risks, even if statistics show it's incredibly safe. That one example is highly available.
Makes sense. Personal stories feel more real than stats sometimes. What's the last one in this trio of cognitive troublemakers?
anchoring. This is where we get stuck on the first piece of information we hear.
The first number, the first impression.
Right. Even if that first piece of info is totally random or irrelevant, it anchors our thinking, and we adjust our subsequent judgments from that starting point, often not adjusting enough.
So that might explain why those initial, maybe kind of weird explanations for things, like that active principle for mice, why they stick around. They were the first anchor.
That's a very plausible connection, yes. So these shortcuts, they're meant to be efficient, but they often make us overconfident. We think we've got it figured out, and we fail to see when we actually need to update our understanding.
Our brains are basically patting themselves on the back for sticking with the first draft, even when it needs serious revision.
And the Yukon Today article adds another layer. It points out that when our core beliefs, our worldview gets challenged, it doesn't just feel like an intellectual debate. It can feel like a personal attack.
Right, like someone's attacking us, not just our idea.
Exactly. And that makes us defensive. We dig our heels in even more.
Which leads to the dreaded backfire effect.
You got it. This is the truly frustrating part. Sometimes, presenting someone with facts that flat out contradict their beliefs doesn't just fail to persuade them. It actually makes them believe their original wrong idea even more strongly.
It's just perverse.
Yeah.
Trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
It feels like it sometimes, and the article explains there's brain chemistry involved. Winning an argument, or at least feeling like you won, releases dopamine, adrenaline, feel-good chemicals.
So our brain rewards us for being stubborn, even if we're factually wrong.
It can, yeah. Being right feels good, biochemically speaking, separate from actually being right.
That's slightly terrifying.
And it gets better. In stressful arguments, the stress hormone cortisol can kick in.
Oh, great. Cortisol. What does that do?
It can hijack our rational thinking, our prefrontal cortex, and push us into fight or flight mode. Suddenly, changing your mind doesn't feel like learning. It feels like surrendering in battle.
No wonder online comment sections are what they are. It's literally hormonal warfare sometimes.
That's
Okay, let's circle back to confirmation bias with that other paper, Nickerson. You mentioned a weird example.
Ah, yes, the white shoe and the black raven. It's a bit of a logic puzzle.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so logically, the statement, all ravens are black, is equivalent to all non-black things are non-ravens.
Okay, following so far.
So observing a white shoe, which is a non-black thing and also a non-raven, technically confirms the statement, all ravens are black.
Wait, seeing a white shoe proves ravens are black? That feels completely wrong.
Psychologically, yes. Logically, it's sound, but intuitively, it feels irrelevant. It shows how our minds don't always follow pure logic when evaluating evidence for our beliefs. We look for direct confirmation, not indirect logical support from white shoes.
Got it. The paper also mentioned motivated versus unmotivated bias.
Right. Motivated is when we want to believe something, maybe because it aligns with our identity or group, so we twist the data to fit. Makes sense.
But unmotivated, we're biased even when we don't care.
Yeah, that's the sneaky part. It seems to be just a default way our brains process info. We tend to look for confirming evidence even when we have no personal stake. The paper mentions studies, like the 246 number task.
Vaguely remember that one. People guess a rule for a number sequence.
Exactly. People are given 246 and asked to figure out the rule. They usually guess even numbers increasing by 2 and then test it by suggesting 8, 10, 12.
Which fits their hypothesis.
Yeah, right. But the actual rule might be much simpler, like any increasing sequence. They failed to test sequences that would disprove their initial guess, like 1, 2, 3. They only seek confirmation.
So we're stuck in confirmation loops, missing the chance to find out we're wrong. And this connects to self-fulfilling prophecies too.
It does. Our expectations shape what we see. The paper mentions studies where teachers were told randomly that certain kids were bloomers.
Even if they weren't picked for any real reason.
Right, and those teachers tended to perceive those kids' performance more positively, maybe interacted with them differently, and sometimes the kids actually did end up doing better. Our expectations created a reality subtly confirming the initial false belief.
Okay, so we're basically wired to be stubborn confirmation seekers whose brains feel attacked by opposing facts and reward us for digging in. Is there any upside to this mess? The first paper hinted at an evolutionary benefit.
It touched on it briefly, yeah. The idea is maybe, way back when, sticking with your tribe's beliefs, even if they weren't perfectly accurate, was crucial for social cohesion, for survival. Agreeing kept the group strong.
Plausible, I guess. Less useful now when arguing about movie spoilers online, maybe?
Probably less useful then, yes. But the paper mostly lands back on the cognitive reasons. Beliefs stick because they fit into our existing pet theories. Pulling one out would unravel the whole mental tapestry, creating cognitive dissonance.
That uncomfortable feeling when beliefs clash.
Exactly. Our brains hate that feeling. They prefer the comfort of coherence, even if it's a slightly flawed coherence.
And there was that weird idea about school-bound explanations.
Oh, right. That's fascinating. People can learn the correct scientific explanation for something like why seasons happen and maybe recite it on a test.
But in their everyday thinking,
They might still sort of operate on their old, intuitive, incorrect model, like knowing the Earth is round but still feeling like it's flat when you look out the window. The new knowledge is compartmentalized, kept separate from their real-life understanding.
wow. So we can know the right answer and still not truly believe it deep down. That really sums up belief perseverance. Okay, so given all this cognitive wiring for stubbornness, is there any hope? Can we get better at changing our minds? The paper mentioned teaching techniques.
It did suggest some things, yeah. Mostly focused on education. Things like student-centered learning, where you're actively engaging, thinking critically, maybe designing experiments yourself.
Instead of just memorizing facts.
Right. The idea is that actively constructing knowledge, reflecting on your own thinking process, discussing different views in a structured way. These things might help. They might make us more aware of our biases and more willing to revise our beliefs.
Might. A slim chance perhaps against our ingrained tendencies.
Well, it acknowledges it's a challenge. Overcoming these deep-seated patterns isn't easy. But fostering critical thinking skills seems like the best bet.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We cling to beliefs like barnacles to a ship's hull.
Apt metaphor.
And it's not just because we're inherently difficult or haven't heard the facts, it's our cognitive shortcuts, like confirmation bias and availability. It's our brain's deep need for consistency, built on those pet theories we started forming as kids.
And it's our brain's defense mechanisms, treating challenges to our beliefs like personal threats, sometimes even rewarding us for doubling down on being wrong with feel-good chemicals.
We construct these elaborate mental narratives, sometimes twisting logic or ignoring facts, all to keep our existing worldview intact. From 17th century mouse recipes to modern-day online arguments.
Exactly. Our brains are incredibly skilled at maintaining the status quo of our beliefs, even when reality is knocking pretty loudly at the door.
So, going back to my keys, always finding them in the last place I look. Logically absurd, but maybe it's not just a silly quirk. Maybe it is a tiny window into this whole thing. We find what we expect to find where we expect to find it.
That's actually a really neat connection, and it brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
All right, leave us with something deep.
Given how powerful and pervasive these cognitive biases seem to be, how deeply rooted they are in our thinking, is genuine objectivity actually possible? Or are we all just constantly, maybe unconsciously, building justifications for what we already believe? Are we always just searching for our mental keys in that last place because that's where our built-in biases told us to look all along? It seems our time for today is wrapping up.
We really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive.
It's always great having your input and thoughts.
But sadly, it seems we've run out of time for today.
Thank you so much for listening and for being such an engaged part of our podcast.
We always value your participation.
Until our next deep dive together.
Goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time.